Welcome, everybody. A change in leadership at generosity.org is the focus of today's conversation. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our live broadcast. I'm Julie Zeglen. I am the managing editor at Technically. We are a news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. Before this role, I was the editor at Generosity.org, which is the news site focused on nonprofits and philanthropy in the Philadelphia region. And since 2015, both news brands shared the same publisher, but that is about to change. So to share the news and discuss the decision and the future, I'm joined today by two people who are most involved in this change up. Can you both introduce yourself? Actually, I'll just welcome you. Chris Wink, welcome. You're the co-founder and CEO of Technically for the last 7 years. You've also led Generosity. That means you've also been my boss. Very exciting. Monique Curry-Mims, you are the founder and CEO of Civic Capital, a philanthropic consulting firm. You're a longtime Generosity contributor, and you are the site's current interim editor. So thank you both for being here.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
So let's get into it. Chris, what is today's news?
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. And Julie, thanks for having the conversation and leading us, because Monique and I have been working the last few months to get here. So yeah, 7 years or so, we at Technically have been publishing Generosity. We took over the news site from our dear friend Sandra Baldino, who founded the organization and started all of the community work that we continued. And we wanted to continue that idea of it being at a rallying point for nonprofit and philanthropy in the Philadelphia region. We did a rebrand. We've done so much work over the last 7 years. Julie, you and so many stakeholders added to the reporting and the journalism through the years. It was clear during the pandemic to me that something else had to happen. So many names I want to shout out: Mo Manklang, Mike Kaiser, Julie Yu, Tony Abraham, Sabrina Vivulius. So many people put so much work into growing this community. And during the pandemic, it was like, okay, something else has to happen. And I wanted to get into that. But today, I'm thrilled to be announcing that Monique Curry-Mims will become, as of today, full owner, operator, and publisher of Generosity.org. No longer be the same organization, technically, in Generosity, though the relationship will remain close. But this is going to become Monique's ship. And I'm thrilled to get to talk about that.
Yeah. Awesome, Chris. Thank you. So Monique, let's hear it from you. How did this partnership come about? How did you get involved with Generosity?
Well, as Chris mentioned, I've been writing for Generosity, I think a little bit before the pandemic, reporting to Sabrina. And last year, a lot of things have just happened where, funny enough, Chris and I were both at the Philly Tech Week kickoff, and it was in the metaverse, and our avatars bumped into each other. And he was like, "Excuse me." I'm like, "Oh, how do I move?" And I turn, I'm like, "Oh, I know that name." He's like, "Oh, I know your name." And we just started talking back and forth. He's like, we should get together in real life. Like, we've never really connected. And a couple months later, like I said, a lot of things were going on. And I was like, "Hey, I need to write. There's things that are going on. I have an ear, or the ear, of a lot of different people, foundation leaders, nonprofit leaders, and government leaders, and we're just talking about the change that needs to happen." And I'm like, well, Generosity is that place where it should be discussed. So I reached out to Chris, and I've got to tell you, if you guys know Chris, he's kind of crazy. The conversation started like 10 minutes late. It was a 30-minute conversation, 10 minutes late, 5 minutes into me talking. He's like, "Dude, my gut is telling me that, like, you should take over Generosity." I was like, "Wait, what? I just want to write an article." He's like, "Dude, you can write all the articles. Like, it's yours." Right? Don't laugh. It's true. I'm like, "I don't want to write all the articles, but I know that Generosity can be the place that's really holding people accountable." Right? I know we're kind of jumping around, but like, Generosity has this storied history, starting with Sandra Baldino, and how Generosity was really just founded around promoting nonprofits and uplifting their work. And talking about where we're going next, we had the pleasure of talking to several funders that really believed in the vision that I was setting forth for this. So I got to give a shout out to Independence Public Media Foundation. I got to give a shout out to Samuel S. Fells Fund, and also LendFest, who's been a supporter in a number of different ways, from our fiscal sponsor to the fellowship programs, to even funding to support this transition.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Monique. Can confirm your take on Chris Wink, by the way, having worked with him for so long. Well, this is super exciting. So, Chris, what does this mean for Technically?
Yeah, that's worth saying there for a sec, because for 7 years, Technically and Generosity have been sister sites. This Monique and I have been doing a whole bunch of conversations over the last really a couple months, but one of the recent ones, someone basically asked, like, okay, Chris Wink, what do you do now that you're unemployed? So it's important to clarify that I'm still employed, for the record. I'm focusing entire time, all of my time on Technically. So that was something that for me was part of this discovery during the pandemic. The theory we had was what Technically did for tech economies. There were tons of lessons for what Generosity was doing in nonprofit and philanthropy. Like, the big idea was so many of these conversations were happening nationally or even globally that local nuance was being lost. So both reporting and community gathering for tech economies, for technologists and entrepreneurs, had a ton of similarities with nonprofit and philanthropy. That yes, there are national trends, yes, there are global trends, but deep local communities are shaping a lot of what this work looks like. It is a local story. And so that was, I think, true. And when we took over Generosity, we put considerable effort into adding some discipline and journalistic strategy and organizational work and like business modeling and a ton of great foundational work. And we got there. And I think it was clearer and clearer that our paths needed to diverge, that the next stage of Generosity needed further specialization and depth within philanthropy, and that Technically we needed to go on our own journey. So for the Technically community, we'll always be close and informed by Generosity. Generosity did a lot to shape our own approach, but we're going deeper. I'm not kicked out yet. Will remain close to Generosity, but Technically keeps on its path of organizing a community of technologists and entrepreneurs, and that remains true.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I having been Generosity's editor since it came under the Technically umbrella 7 years ago, I know that it's taken a lot of different iterations. It's had different people working on it. Shout out to Sabrina, our just dropped a note, former editor who took over after me. So Monique, with that in mind, what do you have planned for Generosity? What's next for the news org?
As I was saying, when Sandra started this, it was really about promoting nonprofits and the work that they were doing. Under Chris, it was kind of like, and Technically, okay, this is what nonprofits are doing. Let's talk about the business of it, right? What is the function of nonprofits within this space? And naturally, the vision that I wanted, that Chris was like, yeah, you got to take it over, was that, okay, we talked about who the nonprofits are, what the philanthropy sector is. Chris talked about how it operates. Now I want to talk about what it's done. I want to talk about impact. So Generosity is moving towards a solutions journalism focus, right? We're really going to be talking to the communities. We're really going to ground Generosity in the community to understand how communities have been moved by nonprofits, by dollars, by programs, social services. So that way we can really have these conversations to talk about what's happening and what should be happening, right? So not just who the organizations are and what money they got, but what actual impact they have had. I'm thrilled to go in this direction, definitely with the support of LendFest, between the Constellation Fellowship, as well as the Media Founders Exchange that I have been accepted into. I think that we can really make an impact, right? I want to make sure that as Generosity takes this new path, that we're working collectively in forming a role that's supplemental to the Billy Penns and the Citizen and even Philanthropy Network, right? We all have a role to play. And I think that with the way our communities are going, we really need to be focusing on the impact that our philanthropic sector is really having, so that way we can learn about where to go in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Monique. Chris, I want to go back to the origin story that Monique mentioned earlier. I'm curious, what you saw in Monique that was exciting to you as the successor of owning the Generosity brand. Why Monique? Why Civic Capital?
Yeah, I appreciated Monique's telling of that. My only contribution to it is I want that to come across as confident and inspired, not flippant. I mean, Monique and I did know each other. We did share a lot of friends in common. So I was already kind of primed to respect and know Monique's work. I think again, this narrative for me is important. Like the amount of foundation that Sandra Baldino laid. Julie, your stewardship of deepening and strengthening its ties is like cannot be overstated. And then Sabrina Vivolius, Julie, as you shouted out, like further deepening it. That like pedigree of that work was crucial. And Sabrina is someone who had raved about Monique and other folks. So like this community around generosity had kind of already primed me. Sabrina and I and Julie, you too, we were having a journey in that pandemic, a conversation of like, where does generosity go next? I think it's hard to be certain at the beginning of that kind of conversation. I just like felt as maybe an entrepreneur, as an organizational leader, I was like, this needs a new home. It was just true in my heart. And so I knew it needed a new home before I knew what that home would be. And so I was having tons of conversations. And in some ways you'd say like Monique isn't the obvious choice. She doesn't come from like a journalism background, but I think what journalism is changed and is changing. And her journalistic approach was clear to me from that initial conversation. I forgot about the metaverse. That is going to be part of that story, Monique, that we were at a metaverse event during Philly Tech Week. There's something telling there, but we had that conversation and everything Monique said was like clear to me. This is where needed Generosity to go next. Monique gives her all to understanding where philanthropy and nonprofit work can go next, but she takes an accountability stance, and she takes a let's have a serious conversation stance that all felt very journalism-y to me, a 15-year veteran of community journalism. So that is why Monique made sense. And her work with Civic Capital, which includes Philanthropy Week, is super mirrored. Many of our friends and community members will know we technically helped get our start via Philly Tech Week, a big open calendar of events, by the way, coming up May 4th to the 13th, this just next month. And to see what Monique is doing with Philanthropy Week seems like so clearly powerful. Let's gather this community, let's be willing to challenge it, let's come together. So Monique is someone I believed in. We then went for like 6 months, getting to know each other better. As noted, she'd been interim Generosity editor. This was no rush effort. We did months of collaborative editing and reporting. We got to know each other, spent a ton of time. Then after we tested a bunch of that relationship, then we went to Independence Public Media Foundation. Thank you, Molly, the Fels Fund, Lenfest Institute, and said, hey, we've tested this. We think there's a chance at a transition of leadership and ownership of Generosity. Can you give us 6 months to do this right? And then Monique and I have gone through the last 6 months with incredible support. Mackenzie Morgan and our team on the product side, many folks involved to get us here. So it's like a year plus from conversation to doing it thoughtfully. And that only helps with a bunch of stakeholders. And Monique, I'm only more confident today than I was from that first conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'd love to hear from either of you, actually, what your thoughts are on the impact that Generosity has had over the years. Monique, anything else you want to add about like why Generosity and why this is exciting to you and what you think the organization can do, but also where does Philadelphia's nonprofit and philanthropy community sit right now? What is new and exciting to you, and how does Generosity fit into that story?
This is really full circle because Philanthropy Week was actually modeled after Philly Tech Week. I'm not even sure if I told Chris that. And I think in our second week, technically was a partner through their, I think, Advance, right? Advance was part of the second philanthropy week. A lot of the consulting work that I do, about 75% of our work is outside of Philadelphia, and most of the work that I do in Philadelphia is more so around connecting, educating, right? Just having these kind of conversations, telling people the best practices that I've seen in the industry, and I think that generosity just sitting at the heart of the local philanthropic sector, where its leaders and community members can really come to understand what is happening in a space, what is happening around the issues that they're working towards. It just made sense to me that Generosity just become part of our, our content division. We already have our Beyond Philanthropy podcast, which is ranked number 6 internationally for philanthropic podcasts. So we're just expanding on our thought leadership and being that go-to resource to really educate and provide insights around what's happening in this space. What's next? I think that especially after 2020, a lot of organizations are really looking to be impactful. They're really trying to understand how things are moving and being more thoughtful of the community. And I think that Generosity can definitely play a role in merging this sector from all of its community members, from the actual people on the ground that are receiving services to the nonprofits, the foundations, even to the governments that are providing grants and social services.
Julie, can I just throw out like a couple impact examples that come to mind? I think it's important to underscore how rare generosity is. Like the philanthropic and nonprofit conversation around the country is rarely covered with any degree of depth or understood as a beat worth focusing on. These are national stories, and sometimes the occasional social services story will end up in kind of general interest media. But to approach this as a beat, as an industry, as someone that needs constant kind of scrutiny and gathering is unusual in a local sense. And that's been a point of pride from Sandra's starting to what we did for 7+ years to what Monique will do now. And so one, the impact is just like elevating that and covering the people doing this work as the deeply influential people that they are. And we cover them with scrutiny at times and cover them with adulation when it was deserved. So a couple of little examples I picture. Julie, you did some of the shepherding of a lot of special projects. I'm picturing when you did your own illustrative and reporting series on like kind of restorative healing inside prisons. I'm picturing when you sent journalists to places like Vermont to look at recidivism and programs around kind of sex offenders returning to society. That kind of coverage of like, how does mission take place was a big part of it. And then Sabrina Vavulius, how we've called that a couple times, her programs around like the Promotora models, bilingual reporting on how programs are having impact. All of those stories of impact were always about the how mission took place, not what was done necessarily, but how was it done, trying to translate that across industry. We've had tons of examples, particularly on the philanthropic side, saying, you covered this program, I found an opportunity to work with them. We saw this, we brought that over there. That is the matchmaking that community reporting is supposed to do, and the rallying that we've always been proud of. And Monique is the right person to bring that to the next level.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks to you both. Monique, we'll wrap up soon, but I'd love to hear a little bit about what you have planned for what's next. What should readers expect? What should observers expect? What's coming up soon?
Well, this week we just switched over to MailChimp. So if you haven't been getting our newsletters, please make sure you resubscribe. We're going to do weekly publishing. We do one lead story a week. It comes out, abbreviated in our newsletter. Read more on our site. But every Tuesday we publish. We're working on a video journalism series called Centering, where we're going to be centering certain issues and having key community members at the table. This June, we were sponsored by Every Voice, Every Vote, and we're going to be having an event called Advance Every Vote, where we're just going to be having fireside chats around key issues that the next mayor should be focusing on during their first 100 days and their policies as they go into the primary season. We're really going to be a place where all stakeholders, community members can come to build community and just learn and connect with each other, and really focusing on accountability and gathering of information so that all of our leaders in this space are well educated enough through our series to be able to make decisions, whether that's for funding or program development.
Awesome. Thank you. I love how many congrats have come through in the chat too. That's exciting to see.
Yes,
So
thank you guys.
On that note, congrats, Monique. Thank you so much for shepherding Generosity into its next era. Thank you, Chris, for your work for the last 7 years. I'm personally really excited to see what comes of Generosity. So we'll look forward to looking for that. So that's all the time that we have for this conversation. Monique and Chris, thank you so much for your time. Everybody tuning in, thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
See you next time.
See ya.